The following program is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not to be considered legal advice. Fraudsters Radio was created to expose the many scams and frauds that have so infected society today. Scammers, fraudsters, and rip-off artists abound, whether it's scamming homeowners with bogus foreclosure relief services, dating fraud, incompetent lawyers, or consumer rip-offs. It's high time the public has a voice. If you work in a profession that deals with fraud, or if you believe you were or are a victim of fraud, you now have a radio listening public that wants to hear from you. Please feel free to message us through our Fraudsters Radio Facebook page, and we may have you on the show as a guest. If you'd like to call in for today's show, the number is 646-668-8512.
And welcome to Fraudsters Radio Show, another great show coming up. This is Laurie Z, your host, actually your co-host, because I'm here with Storm Bradford, my co-host, and the owner of Mortgage Fraud Examiners. Storm, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, Laurie. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. I know we got a kind of a big show today because we want to cover or recap all of the previous shows, maybe if you haven't heard the show before, and get an idea that, yes, we want to expose scammers, but we also want to help people not get scammed. And so in some of the past shows that we've talked about securitization audits, mortgage fraud, wire fraud, IRS fraud, we've covered a lot of fraud. So what would you like to start with today?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that we have a very, very special guest today.
Ooh.
And her name is Laurie Z. And she's going to explain why and how a lot of these credit repair companies are basically scamming the public.
Yeah, I can definitely talk on that, as you know, as a credit expert. I can tell you at one point the FTC actually had like a press release up, and I don't see it anymore, but it stated that from the Federal Trade Commission that 95% of credit repair companies were frauds, and I will agree because I'm on a different boat than all those people. But what happens with credit repair companies typically is they will advertise that they can get almost everything or anything that's on your report. My favorite words, we can sweep your credit report clean. We can wipe your credit report clean. We remove every single thing you've ever heard of that's bad on your report. And it's sad that people actually believe all that because there are federal laws, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that says if something is reporting accurately, it can stay. The problem is that most consumers don't even know how to read a credit report to begin with. That's a big thing. They don't know what the laws are regarding things that are, reporting improperly, and so they don't really do due diligence, Storm. They go online, they read what's online, which, a lot of times is wrong. No one in a credit repair company is going to explain to them how it actually works. And the reason why, it's kind of like what you do at Mortgage Fraud Examiners. The reason why, first off, people really don't care. They don't want to know. They just want to hire somebody that's going to make this magic happen. And then if they spent thousands of dollars, they're really unhappy and nothing has happened. And in reality, someone who is legitimate, the way I work, for example, as a consultant, an analyst, and a teacher, is I am not involved with credit repair at all. I make no promises versus a credit repair company makes all the promises. How can you promise something to someone when it comes to that when you're dealing with a multitude of companies? There's absolutely no way to make promises. And so I find that scary, especially when I get a client who is coming from a credit repair company and tells me, oh, my God, I've been spending $100 a month for 2 years. That's $2,400, and almost nothing has happened on their report. So why do people fall for that and believe it?
And it's funny, Laurie, is you kind of use the magic phrase where they say, I don't know. They don't know what they don't know. I was speaking to somebody earlier today and her comment was, I don't know how they do this, and I don't know how they did that, and I don't know. And I said, you're right. You don't know. You only assume that's what they did. Allegations don't cut it. It's not what you can allege. It's what you can prove. And unfortunately, people are getting scammed every day by a bunch of conclusions and presumptions and assumptions with no facts. And I know what you do is you provide education, and if somebody wants to contact you to get education on how actually these how credit repair works, you'll give them that. Just like at Mortgage Fraud Examiners, we educate people on what works and what doesn't work. And if they decide that they have their transaction analyzed, we'll do it. But other than that, it's an education process, and that's what this show was created for, to educate the public.
Right. Well, one thing we both do is we give people the tools. I mean, you perform an exam, on mortgage transactions, whereas I perform an exam on credit reports. And after doing it for so many years, it's kind of like I refer it to being when you start out with good credit, it's like a Rubik's Cube. You got the one color on each side. But something happened. You spent too much money. You got in too deep. You got divorced. You have medical problems. And all of a sudden, that Rubik's Cube has changed into a mess. So what do? You want to go out. Most people are looking to buy a house when they need to have someone help them with their credit. And so they start calling companies that are on Craigslist or some of the bigger name companies. But you know what the problem is, Storm? They don't explain to the client what's actually happening. So the client, by reading their ads, is led to believe that, a lot of times in 30 days or less, we can get all of this off your report. Baloney, not going to happen. The only way that might happen is if you're a victim of identity theft, and that works a little bit differently than, just regular issues, as I call them. So people want to believe what they read online, and then they go ahead and do it. And a lot of times these companies are fly by night. They hire someone in a different state, and they lose their money. And so I find that difficult to fathom, but they get away with it.
And like the point that you brought up is that if something is legitimate and is on the credit report, it's not coming off. For an example, let's look at a bankruptcy. You file bankruptcy, and now it's on your credit report. There's no legal way to get it off your credit report.
Well, interestingly, Storm, and in a few months ago, I can't quote you the law, but I know the law's changed, where certain government items will no longer appear on your report. Now, bankruptcy may or may not appear on your report, but let's say you had a judgment or a lien of some type. That may no longer show up on your report. So when I work with, for example, a mortgage representative sends me a prospective client, they have to not only pull the credit report, they have to run a public background check to see, does that client have anything on their report that would stop that deal from going through, once the client's scores were high enough. And it's a little bit scary now, because if the government is saying, hey, we're not going to put it on the regular credit report, then how is that fair to all the other people that don't have that? Because it doesn't appear then that they have any problems. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I know that what they're basically talking about is like tickets and things like that. You get a ticket for speeding on one of these cameras that they have now throughout the United States. They're not putting those on credit reports. I know
they're
that.
Not putting those, yep.
But I do know that if you file bankruptcy, it will be on your credit report, and there is no legal way to get that off your credit report. Now, you can commit fraud, and there's a couple of tricks that people use, but it's fraudulent, and you don't want to get caught.
Yeah, the biggest one is, for example, here's the fraud. If it's a Chapter 7 dispute and say it's a Chapter 13, and then supposedly it might come off. But what happens with a credit repair company, most people have no idea how it works. They think, hey, I hire this company, and usually the company sends out letters on their behalf without the client ever reading it. And I find that to be dangerous because I wouldn't want anybody sending out letters with my name attached to them if I didn't know what was in those letters. But bigger companies, that's what they do. A lot of companies do that. The client then thinks that because the 3 letters they're sending out to the 3 credit bureaus each month, and remember it's an average of 100 a month for 3 letters each month, the client thinks that, they're told that if the company does not respond, if the credit bureau does not respond, then it comes off their report. And I have to laugh. I go, really, who's going to make them? They're not going to take it off the report, the credit bureaus, because the creditors and the collectors are paying subscribers to the credit bureaus. So they are on the same side as the collector and the credit bureau. The collector and the credit bureau, the collector and the creditor typically do not see any letters. So here's how it actually works. If I send in a dispute letter to the credit bureaus, no one's reading those letters 99% of the time. They're optically scanned, and then a 2-digit code is converted into a 2-digit code. I believe there are probably about 22 codes. So it's all scanned, converted, all by computer, then sent through an email system called eOscar, and that goes out from the credit bureau to the creditors and the collectors. Whatever is in the creditor and collectors' computers, they have the same program, and guess what? They zap it back. So if nothing's changed, your chances are very slim, especially when it's something that's reporting accurately. So people have to stop thinking that there's anyone actually reading their letters unless the company is sending letters to the creditors and the collectors as well as the credit bureaus. Then the creditors and the collectors will see that letter, for example, if you're trying to validate a debt. But people don't know how it works, and when I'm probably one of the few that actually explains it to prospective clients because I don't want them to get ripped off. And it's the same thing you do with mortgage fraud examiners.
In regards to the letters that you're talking about, a lot of these scammers, they tell people that there's something called tacit acceptance where, you write a letter and you say, look, the moon's made out of cheese and it rained on that day, and if you don't deny this within 5 days, you deem to admit it, and therefore you have to take it off my credit report or some other nonsense in other fields. They do the same thing, and the letters are just total nonsense, and it doesn't work. So a lot, which is unfortunate, as you know, and I know, that there's so much that goes on out there that people, if they just use common sense, as I try to tell people, if it doesn't pass the reason, logic, and common sense test, it's not real. It's something that somebody's made up, or they've taken some concept from some other field and they tried to put it into this concept to make it work. But, there's just no way, no how that people are going to legally get government documents such as bankruptcy and things like that off their credit report without committing some sort of fraudulent act. So it's pretty clear.
Right. It is, and I want to talk a little bit more about it, but let's do a quick commercial break, and we'll be back in a moment.
Have you received a notice of foreclosure on your property? Do you suspect that you're involved in an unfair or fraudulent loan agreement? Are you looking for a way to save your home? Would you like to cut through all the misinformation and find out what really works? Would you like to learn strategies that the so-called gurus aren't aware of? If you answered yes to any of those questions, a professional team at Mortgage Fraud Examiners can assist you and your attorney with all of these things and more. Contract breaches, errors, statutory regulatory violations, fraudulent appraisals, and other fraudulent conduct cause most mortgages to be legally problematic. In fact, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation found that nearly 2,000 financial institutions they assessed received citations for significant compliance violations. They also examined appraisals and found out that of the 259 appraisals reviewed for accuracy, Only 7 fully complied with professional standards. Call us at 844-920-7200. That's 844-920-7200. Mortgage Fraud Examiners, 844-920-7200.
And we're back from the break. Stormy with me?
I'm back.
All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit more.
I was just saying that we're back with our very special guest, Laurie Z, who's and co-host, who's educating us on what works, what doesn't work, pertaining to credit repair. Go on, Laurie.
Right.
Keep educating.
Yeah. So what I was explaining with credit repair companies is that the majority of them are bogus. People waste thousands of dollars. They think that miracles are going to happen. And, FICO bases things on, they have a secret model, a secret algorithm they don't reveal. So there are different percentages for different things. But in essence, the way to develop high scores is never to make a late payment, owe as little on your credit cards as possible. You want a perfect payment history. And don't open and close credit cards. And those are point hits. I hear scary things. People will call me up and go, well, if I call this mortgage company and then I call 4 more, it's all supposed to count as one hit, right? And while everyone seems to advertise that, the answer is no, that's false. You're going to different companies. Each one of those is going to be an inquiry hit, 2 to 5 points. So here's a scary one. You go to a car dealer, and the finance guy, after you've made your deal with the salesman, you go to the car finance guy, and he's going to run your credit. Now, unless you bring him a document and have him sign it that says only run my credit one time, he may run that credit 10 times. So if it's 5 points per inquiry, approximately, he just dropped your score 50 points. So they only need to run your credit once. That's all they need to do, 5 points. If you can't qualify, there's a problem. But if you've run it 50 points, he's now dropped you into a lower category in credit. He's dropped your score substantially, which will take a couple of years to come back from that. And meantime, you're going to get a higher interest deal on that car than as if you had gone to your own bank and gotten qualified at your own bank.
Well, I have a real-life example of that. My wife went out to a car dealer, and she was having some work done on her car. And while she was waiting around, she went into the showroom and started to speak with a sales guy. And he was asking her, what type of car are you looking at? And she was telling him, and he started looking at cars and so forth. Well, anyway, she ended up buying a car, but, he asked her pertinent information that she regrettably gave to him. And about a few weeks after that, she says to me, why is my credit report, I just saw my FICO score is down a lot. And I said, well, did you open any new accounts? Did you paid your bills on time? Yeah. So I looked at it. There it is. You had 15. This guy went to 15
Oh, my God.
lenders. And as you said, you're 5 points on each one, and that's why your credit report went down. So that's
right.
Good to know, and that's good advice to be able to say to somebody, look, I'm going to tell you what, you want to run it, you run it once.
Yeah, you're better off going to a bank who's only going to run it once and have it be one inquiry hit. When the finance person's telling you they have to run it that many times, maybe I would say once, maybe twice, maybe because if you don't know where your scores stand. My little trick when I bought a car is I go to the FICO's website for consumers. It's called myfico.com, and it's not cheap. However, it shows you FICO scores for different industries. Car FICOs, mortgage FICOs, credit card lending FICOs, because there's not just one set of FICOs. That's how FICO makes their money with these different algorithms. So when I buy a car, I spend the money and I pull the MyFICO. So say it's $40 to pull MyFICO. Most dealers use Equifax. So then I can look at my Equifax. I bring my copy of MyFICO with me because they're still going to want to pull it once. And basically I just have them sign off and say you're not going to pull my credit more than one time because I know how it works. And that way, I only have the one inquiry hit. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, but when they're telling you they're trying to find you the best deal, if they're running it more than twice, no, they're trying to drop your score so that now your interest rate is going to be higher. And that seems to be the way of car world. You know, mortgages, yeah, you got to be careful. If the same mortgage person is pulling it more than once, and it depends upon what third-party provider they are using, you know, that generates those reports, most of them will allow that mortgage person to pull on that client maybe a couple of times within, say, I think it's a 28 to 30-day period, and it doesn't affect it. But if you go to multiple mortgage companies, then yes, those are individual hits. And so when I look at a report storm, it's almost like I can see how desperate somebody is by how many inquiries they're pulling on their report. And so when I talk to someone who's done that, I already know they're in financial trouble. I can already tell just from looking at the report that if you've had that many pulls on that many different types of credit, then you haven't learned anything about money and budgeting. And that's my key point is I don't teach finance, but you can use a free tool called mint.com to teach you how to budget. If you're an adult, you should know how to budget and live within your means. You should also understand at least the cliff notes of how credit works. That way you develop positive credit and you don't end up in a messy mess, you know, calling some disreputable company that's going to just take your money. It's just sort of like with you know, how all the lawyers would just take the money each month even though they were pretender defenders. Well, it kind of works the same way here with credit repair organizations. Most of them just take the money and they don't personally care, you know, and so that's what makes it more difficult. There's no personal relationship either.
You know, and I would surmise that the vast majority of the public doesn't realize that somebody, you know, you go in, you want to open up an account, that affects their credit report because every time that they check your credit, obviously, as you just pointed out, that it drops their FICO score. And I would bet big money that the vast majority of the public doesn't understand that.
No, they don't understand how it works at all. They just read whatever somebody's ad says, and then they maybe look up a few things, and they don't consider the source of the information. Where is it coming from? Who is giving it? And if it's coming from a credit repair company, or even sometimes I see some of the monitoring services, most of them have like a free advice type thing on their site that says do certain things. And some of it's correct, but some of it isn't, because those are companies that are looking to make money for themselves. They're not necessarily looking to help the client. So here's a case in point. You've got a company called Credit Karma. It's owned by one of the credit bureaus. And so the majority of people who call me tell me, oh, my score said it was 700 on Credit Karma, but when I had a mortgage person pull it, it was to 650. How come a 50-point difference? Well, Credit Karma does not use FICO scores. They use another scoring model called Vantage, which most companies don't use. And they also don't show Experian, by the way. So if something's on your Experian report, you won't see it because it doesn't necessarily appear on all three bureaus. But what Credit Karma does is entice you to open, close, balance transfer credit cards. That's what they're about and how they make money each time someone clicks through. They give you what we call FACO scores, those Vantage scores, so they're not real. And I can tell you I have it myself, and my credit cards length of history on Credit Karma is much shorter than in reality. My credit cards, I've had them years and years. They don't show that way on Credit Karma. So for most people, you know, that site's okay if you want to be alerted to changes on your report, but as far as scores and accuracy, that would be a poor choice. You know, my FICO, yes, owned by the FICO company, expensive, yes, but in reality, you want the right thing. The right thing is going to cost more money. The cheaper free thing is going to cost less money, and then that's where people screw up, and then they end up paying twice as much because they're stuck and they didn't do it right the first time.
And you know what I've noticed quite often that a lot of these scam mortgage relief services that, you know, do these ridiculous securitization audits and make other types of ridiculous arguments, that one of the services that they provide is credit repair. So I see that quite often. Go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of companies try to find some type of a related business that they can be associated with. If you remembered on a prior show, I think I mentioned, like, if you look up foreclosure defense attorneys, this is down here in Florida, that I would say more than half of them are also bankruptcy attorneys. So they're looking for things that go together where they can make money and not necessarily help you. And that's sort of the sad part. Maybe I'm old school, but, for me, it's about, yes, I charge a fair price. Actually, I think I charge a low price. But what I actually do involves the consumer or my client, so that they have to follow through. And it's like lesson assignments. They have to read certain things. They send out letters. They get letters back. They'll send them back to me. We'll talk about whether or not they're accurate. There are times with collections where things can get deleted if something's incorrect. Does it happen all the time? No. But beware of the ignorant person who calls a collection agency and says, "Oh, I want to settle out this debt." Well, now you've just admitted it's your debt on a recorded line. And the truth is, sometimes the client thinks it's their debt, and then it's not their debt when they get the paperwork back. That's what's really scary. People will just go ahead and call, especially on medical debts. They just assume if it's medical, it's automatically theirs. And sometimes it's not.
Well, you look at these advertisements that these companies have, and in reading it, you say, wow, this is pretty easy. What they're saying here is if I get anything bad at all, to include bankruptcies and judgments and all that, is coming off. At least
it's all
that's
baloney.
the way the public looks at it.
Right. That's why the public looks at it, and that's why those businesses will always make more money than I will, because people choose to believe the fast, easy, and cheapest way, and they don't want to understand something as important as credit is as important as understanding money. But again, people with bad credit, unless they went through a bad situation, there are some people that go through a bad situation and they had good credit and they know how it works and they got divorced. I understand that. There are some people who have bad credit their entire lives. They don't want to spend any time at all learning it because they go, oh, boring topic. Boring topic, if you knew anything about it, it would save you thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime in interest rates and fees. It's kind of like when you open up your credit card statement. Most people don't look to see if they carry a balance what they're paying. I actually have charts on this type of stuff. And it's overwhelming when you have a credit card, with a 25% interest rate and you owe $1,000. Oh my God, forget it. You're going to be working 2 or 3 jobs forever. You're going to be working 80 hours a week. Are you doing that because you can't live within your means and make, you got to determine for yourself what's your realistic budget, your reality check, and you have to live under that amount, because what happens if you have an emergency? Now, what happens if you go out and buy a house and you can't make that mortgage payment? Well, what happens. Not only will it drop your score 1 to 200 points, and FICO says that, but then they'll accelerate for foreclosure.
When we come back, because it's going to, I'm sure, take a while to explain it, can you explain what someone can do if there's been some sort of fraud regarding their information? I think that would be something that our listeners would like to hear, because I think that's very important. Because I do know now with the internet, I see I can't remember which company's doing it, but they'll go on the dark web to show you whether or not your information is being used, and what someone can do. If that happens to them, who do they call? Do they call you? What do they do? But they need to be educated to have some sort of remedy to overcome that.
We can do that. I'm actually on my stuff is all on the dark web, and I'm an identity theft victim, so I can certainly share my story, and I think that would help people. Let's go to a commercial break, and we come back. Let's talk about that.
That'll work.
All right. Stay with us.
there is a very high likelihood your mortgage contains an extensive error. At Mortgage Fraud Examiners, we know just how costly a missed opportunity can be. For almost 40 years, we have consulted, retained, and referred to by attorneys, lawyers, trial practitioners throughout the nation. Put another way, we are the trusted source for litigation support. A foreclosure is basically an allegation the homeowner breached the contract by failing to make timely payments. The contract is clear. The borrower promised they would make timely payments, and if they didn't, the lender could take the property. The only way to overcome the homeowner's breach is to show the lender breached first. Identify errors that would void the contract. Identify regulatory violations. Identify appraisal fraud and other fraudulent contact. And the only way to find these wrongs is to thoroughly examine the whole mortgage transaction. This meticulous examination of your mortgage transaction and appraisal can identify legal defects that would make your mortgage unenforceable and entitle you to compensation or even free title to your property. Call us at 844-920-7200. Mortgage Fraud Examiners, that's 844-920-7200. 844-920-7200.
We're back with our very special guest and co-host, Laurie Z, on AM/FM 24/7 radio. And you were just getting ready to explain before we took the break exactly what someone can do if there's been some sort of identity theft.
I'm going to do that. And actually, before I do that, I just want to give out our call-in number in case anybody wants to call in live for the show, 646-668-8512. Okay, and to go back to credit reporting fraud. First off, a lot of times it's not fraud. First thing you should do when you look at your credit report, Storm, is actually go right to the section that has personal information. Look through that information and see, are all of the names yours? Because sometimes there are name variations, but sometimes it might be someone's completely different name. Also, if you're a junior, senior, father, son, you could have a merged file. So what happens is when you go to when you go to a company where they're going to pull your credit, and you think, hey, it's by my social and my name, their databases search for things that are similar. So to give you an example, I once had a client with a fairly common last name, lived in an apartment complex, and I was helping him. He was my client. And then next door to him lived another guy with the same last name, not related. Both of them had each other's information on their credit report. So it wasn't actually fraud, or unless you would deem the credit bureaus, mixing the information. There should be more personal identifiers to separate out people. So sometimes the file itself is merged. Where you're a true victim of identity theft most of the time is when you start getting phone calls from companies that you've never heard of, saying they want their money. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, I don't owe any money. I don't know who you are. What is this? And at that point, yes, you have to look through your report very carefully and make sure that each credit line is actually yours. What makes it confusing, Storm, is that a lot of times they don't list certain dates. The most important date, if you have bad credit, on the negative credit lines to look for, is called the date of initial delinquency. And that sets the clock, depending upon what state you're living in, for a statute of limitations for collection, and also a 7-year statute of limitations for credit reporting, with the exception of some government items, like bankruptcy, Chapter 7 can run 10 years, and some of the liens and things like that can run 10 or 20 years. So when you look at it, go to the personal information first. Did you live at all the addresses? Were all those phone numbers yours? You're looking for clues that it might have other people's information on your file. If you are getting the phone calls, though, then more likely you're truly a victim of identity theft. Now, you had mentioned the dark web, and you can go through a number of sources online to check the dark web. Let me tell you something. Almost every person's Social Security number is on the dark web. That's my opinion. I am on the dark web. Most of the people I know are on the dark web. And if you go to Equifax, or even if you sign up with my FICO, they check and tell you if you're on the dark web. And so these underground criminals sell your Social Security. Do you want to guess how much money they get for your Social Security number?
I would have no idea.
Just take a wild guess.
God, I wouldn't know. It's probably cheap.
It's $1.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably cheap.
That $1 is the going rate. And so here's what happens to someone like me, who I had my purse stolen many years ago. The person got all my stuff. Fortunately, because of what I do, I was able to stop it, but it's very upsetting when it happens to you. When you are a voter here in Florida and you're a registered voter, I don't know in other states, but here I do. If I type in my name and then the word voter, or even without it, it'll pop up in Google. And what the state of Florida does is they publish your full name, your physical address, and they also publish your date of birth. Now take that combined with someone having your Social Security number on the dark web, and guess what happens? They got all your stuff.
Yeah.
They got all your stuff. They can go do anything. So if you believe you're in a fraud situation, the first thing you could do, and you can use Google to find this, usually I say Google Equifax fraud alert. And you can put a 90-day fraud alert on your file, and Equifax reports it to the other two bureaus. So now it's like a little layer of extra security. Ultimately, though, you're probably going to have to file an ID theft affidavit, which you can get through the Federal Trade Commission. Typically, you need to have that notarized. And that's a 7-year fraud alert, basically, on your file. So what that means is that for the next 7 years, anybody that wants to open credit for you, they're going to ask you extra security questions. Now, in my case, I had one further complication, too long a story, but basically what I will tell you I had to do was to put security freezes on my credit reports. And when you get a security freeze, if you're a victim, it's either cheap or free on most of the bureaus to do that, and they give you a PIN number. And so each time I apply for credit, which is not very often, I have to call whichever bureau or bureaus they're using, the credit grantor, and then tell them lift it for 24 hours or lift it for 6 hours, whatever the time frame is, and then relock it. And so you can never lose that PIN number. Now, I read recently there's supposed to be another new law coming into effect that says that security freezes should be free for everybody because of the amount of security breaches for all these big companies. The truth is, a security freeze should be mandatory because if everybody's credit was locked up, then it would be really hard for anyone to go in. Because remember, a credit grantor is going to ask you now for additional proof of identification. They might not just accept a driver's license or a Social Security card. They may be asking for a lot more information. But I think it should be a mandatory thing, and that would help cut out a lot of the fraud. Just my personal opinion.
Well, this has happened to me a couple of times. It's happened to my wife a couple of times where we got an alert, I think it's from Amazon, where mine specifically was I bought this $400 pair of tennis shoes. And it was from China. How did they do that? How can somebody do that, like on Amazon, these other places? Now, Amazon was more than gracious enough when I explained it to them it wasn't mine. They took the charge off. But how do these guys get into this where they can charge stuff from these foreign countries? Do you know how they do that?
I'm assuming that they may have or hacked your information. They could have gotten into your Facebook without you even knowing it. But usually that's some type of a hack. They had to have collected your information somewhere. Remember, most information is made public. Like if you type in your name, for most people, your address comes up because it's part of public records of that state. So there are sites like Who's This, there's a bunch of them that list, like if you type in your name, it'll say Laurie Zook lives in this state, and here's her address and her phone number and her information. Now, if you're a victim of identity theft, what I've done is I've gone to each of those companies and emailed them. I'm a victim of identity theft, and you are helping to continue perpetrate this crime. Please remove me permanently from your list. And for the most part, I've been pretty successful. But the fact is, everything on the Internet is public. I don't care what they say. Somebody has your information somewhere, and you have to protect that information, and a security freeze really is the best way to do it.
Also, too, have you heard about this one? Now, I've gotten this call several times, over the months and over the years, where I get this call out of the blue, and they're saying, look, there's no need to be alarmed, but we're checking on your Visa card or MasterCard or whatever it is, and give us a call at such and such a number. Are you familiar with that scam?
Yeah, I've heard that one. I've heard all of them. I've heard the U.S. Treasury calling me for they were going to give me $9,000 that I don't have to pay back. I got a call this morning for the millionth time, and I'm on the do not call list from a company trying to sell me health insurance plans. I get dozens of these. I'm going to say in a week I might get 20, and I'm not kidding. They all are about how much information they can get. Most of them can spoof the phone numbers they're calling from, so you can't even track them down, and they seem to get away with it. And I don't know why our laws aren't stronger, because no one should be able to buy equipment that spoofs.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems as though that there's so many ways, like that FBI agent was explaining last week, so many ways that the public can get scammed. It's just, it's gotten to the point that it's ridiculous.
Right. Well, if you don't know, here's how I work phone calls. If you're not programmed into my phone and the phone rings, I let it go to voicemail. And a lot of times it only rings 4 times and there's no message. So then I have a little application called Calls Blacklist. Dingo, I just stick them in there. I probably have 100 numbers in there. I'm not kidding you. And some of them will call from the same numbers. Some call from different numbers. But I can blacklist these people so they will never get me on the phone. You would think they would give up, but no, now they just spoof another phone number. So, typically if you get an email that looks official, or if you get a phone call, mine say, this is your credit card company calling. As soon as you start out with, this is your credit card company calling, well, you're not telling me what credit card company. I have more than one, and no one is, someone who falls for that, that's sad. Because if someone, I hang up. If it said, this is Bank of America calling for you, I actually spoke to the person, I say, you know what? I'm going to call you back on your regular published number, because I don't believe anybody anymore. They're all scams. You have to treat everything like it's a scam nowadays.
Yeah, the amount of scams is just utterly ridiculous. Well, I'll tell you what, maybe after the break, you can come on, and we basically said what doesn't work as far as credit repair is concerned. And maybe you can give us some tips on what possibly does work, on how, if there is something that's incorrect on our credit report, how to actually dispute it and what we can do to get it off.
Sure. All right, let's go to a commercial break then, and we'll come back pretty quickly.
Consumers, do you have bad credit? Can't purchase a house or car? Paying too much in interest on your credit cards and loans? Scammed by credit repair companies? There is hope. You can get back on track and do it the right way. Call Credit Education Consultants today at 813-500-6064. That's 813-500-6064. Or go to crediteducationconsultants.com now and get the help you need. Don't delay. Call today. Mortgage reps and realtor inquiries are also welcomed.
Well, here we are. We're back with our very special guest and co-host, Laurie Z, and she's about to explain how we can, if there's something wrong on our credit report that's for real, how we can get it off. Laurie, take it away.
Sure. Well, first off, if it's your personal information has been compromised, or if you're not sure of the name variations, one of the things you have to do if you're going to try to work with the credit bureaus, which is fairly difficult, you can certainly write up a letter disputing whatever you feel is incorrect, listing all the information on, say, incorrect accounts or incorrect names. But you must also include copies of 2 pieces of ID. Typically, most of my clients send like a photo driver's license or a passport, and then it's your Social Security card or birth certificate, copies only. But you must have, one from each category. If you don't do that, sorry, but yours won't even make it through the system. So when you do that, remember, those letters are going to be converted into 2-digit codes. How you get things legitimately corrected, you must have proof that something is different than what's on your report. Now, if you have that information, you can make copies of it, keep the originals, send it with an explanation letter and the 2 forms of ID to the credit bureaus, and you can see if the credit bureau will attempt to correct it. And typically, they have 30 days from the day they receive it, and so it's figured about 35, 36 days before you may get a response back, and you can check and look that way. Simpler, again, is if you have information that proves that what they're reporting is incorrect, then you can call a creditor and say, whoa, Mr. Creditor, you're reporting incorrect information. I have copies of the correct information. And then they'll give you the address, and you can mail, scan, or fax it over to them. But you have to be the one to follow up and keep a log of the names and numbers of the people that you speak with so that you have some type of proof. Also, you can do it via certified return receipt letter, which is more proof. That way, if something doesn't go, your way, and you have the proof down the road, if you had to hire an attorney, you're going to have something in writing rather than just a phone call. Now, one of the big issues with medical, I find, on people's reports is they have no clue because of the HIPAA privacy laws. When you see a medical collection, the law basically says that you can't put on a credit report the name of the doctor or the type of, doctor, like was it a cancer doctor? It has to be generic. But a lot of times they see the medical and they don't even know what it's for. So in those cases, I typically tell a client, call up, if you have insurance, call the insurance company. Ask them to send you a copy because they should have been sending you an explanation of benefits, and you want to know what it's for, because sometimes you might find out it's not even yours. So there are ways to deal with medical and collections, and sometimes you can negotiate collections to what's called an agreement to delete. Now, you don't just pick up the phone and call a collector and say, hey, I want an agreement to delete, because they're just going to laugh at you. You just now admitted to the debt. Instead, typically what I have clients do is send out a letter looking for certain information, because collectors tend to re-age the debt forward in time from when it initially went delinquent with the original creditor. And remember, we talked about statute of limitations before. So as debts sell off and sell off and sell off, you end up in credit prison, all because these companies are not putting the date of initial delinquency from when you first defaulted. So when I don't see an original creditor corresponding to a collector, a lot of times that tells me that the debt may be very old. If a debt is very old or it's reporting incorrectly, it may be possible, again, in writing, you try and do it, to get an agreement to delete that debt when you make a full or partial payment. Doing it and getting it in writing is important, especially if you're going for a mortgage, because the mortgage company rep will want a copy of that, because they use a program called Rapid Rescore, which costs the client money, but it gets it off faster than the 30 to 45 days that a credit bureau would take to get it off. So, when people go, oh, everything can come off, no. Can legitimate things come off if they're marked? If there's something wrong with the way they're marked, typically you can get it marked correctly. Now, I'm also going to tell you there is one other exception. Most of these companies use a format called Metro 2, which is the form they fill out on you when they go to report you. So there are ways with Metro 2 sometimes to get things off, because, again, that person entering the data, when I look at a report and I see a credit line and it shows me TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, and it has different numbers or different dates on there, it tells me that something, again, it's a red flag that something is wrong. So what I do is I actually provide letters to clients where they fill in the information. They have to actually read everything. And then when information comes back, they have to read it, and then we discuss it, and I explain to them it means this. It means you owe the debt. It means you don't owe the debt. It means the debt is past the statute of limitations. It means you might have a chance on, me showing you how to, teach you how to try and negotiate it off the report for a dollar amount, but doing it the right way. And the reason I say that is because most people, they just see their report and they pay their collections off, and common sense would say, hey, if I paid off the collection, it zeroes out, my score would go up. But in credit world, the first time you got the collection, your score dropped maybe 30 to 100 points. When you go to pay that collection, you know what happens? The score drops a second time. It does not go up. It goes down again like double punishment, and people don't know that. And that's one of the things that I like to talk about because it's sort of an eye-opener because it's the opposite of what common sense dictates.
Now, I know that a lot of these debt collectors, what they do is they have specific tricks that they use to try to trick somebody. Can you explain what some of those tricks are and how to avoid them?
Yeah, the most common one is called a CPN, or it has different, it's an acronym for credit privacy number. And so what some companies will do is they will assign you a second 9-digit number that appears to look like a Social Security number or an EIN number, a company number, when in reality those numbers are usually that of someone who's either deceased or a Social Security number that hasn't been used yet, although it is common for them to use existing Social Security numbers, believe it or not, and try to create a second file. And I know that is a felony. And so if a person does that, they can also go to prison as a felony for doing that. It's called a segregated file. So you have to be aware. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. If someone's making you, promises that your credit is going to be great in a very short amount of time, run the other way because they're doing something that's not legal, and now you are involved in that, and you're at the very least an accessory.
I do know one of the tricks that debt collectors will use, especially if they'd really like to stick it to somebody, is that, as you know, it can only be on their credit report for 7 years. So what they'll do is, after 6 years and 11 and a half months, they'll call up, the debtor and say, look, I tell you what, you owe us $2,000 on your credit card. Why don't you just go ahead and we'll kill this debt for, $200.
Right.
And you go ahead and you pay the $200, and lo and behold, it's back on your credit report for another 7 years. And I know people don't realize that.
They don't. And a sadder story is I once had an almost client, and you'll see why I couldn't take her as a client, who called me before. Who called the collection agencies in between me and the mortgage person. So mortgage person first, then the collection agencies, then me. And I was like almost in tears for her because she was in tears. All of the debts on her report were older 7 years and never should have been reporting. How that happens, don't know, but it did. They were re-aged debts. She went ahead and paid all of those debts that were older than 7 years. And I had to tell her that she was not even responsible to pay those debts, and she might want to talk to an attorney at that point, because collection agencies will do sneaky and deceitful things to get your money. And they are not allowed by law to harass you, threaten you. We're coming to your house. The sheriff's coming now. We're going to we're going to do this. Anything that's threatening, calling you names, obscene names. Are you a liar, cheater, thief? I've heard every story. Knocking at your door 9 o'clock at night. At that point, you need a good debt collection attorney, and a good portion of them will take cases like that on contingency, meaning it doesn't cost you anything. So you have to know how to win against a debt collector, especially if they have wronged you. But if you don't know how to read a credit report, which most people don't, Storm, that's the beginning of the end. And, when I started doing this 12 years ago, I remember going, oh, my God, there's 20 million types of credit reports. After you've been reading them for a long time, it's simple. To a normal person looking at it, most people look at it and go, oh, my God, I have no clue what any of this means. Well, this is why I have a business as a credit consultant, and this is why I analyze and teach people so that they can then control their credit lives and understand what it is they're doing. And when they're done with me, they know what they can't do and what they need to do. And that's how they eventually and realistically build their credit up over time. Companies that promise you everything gone in 30 days, like I said, run, you're going to be in trouble.
Well, let me ask you, you've explained a lot about how, you're educating us on how things work and what doesn't work things such of that nature. If someone calls you and wants your service, what specifically do you give them to help educate them on all aspects of credit repair or credit non-repair, if you will?
Yeah, good question. I typically charge a flat rate, and for some people it's just 1 month. For some people it may just be for a few months, depending upon how quickly they work with me. We work in tandem. But typically what I do is I prepare a spreadsheet analysis after I've gone through all the reports. Every little note, every little thing, anything I question goes onto that analysis. I send it to the client, and we set up a phone consultation. I'm going to ask them a lot of questions. They're going to ask me a lot of questions. I'm going to explain in English what everything actually means to them. And then I actually generate a customized report. It's sort of like a master plan, and it tells them how credit works in their situation and things that they can do. Now, most people go on, like I said, to 2, 3, 4 months. I'm going to say 4 months is probably the average client with me. If you have a lot of stuff, it could be a lot longer. If you have less stuff, it could be shorter. I provide the letters. They plug and play in the information that's missing, their address, the account numbers. It's pretty simple. And they keep all the records. They have to read everything. And then when they get information back, they send it back to me, and then we go over what I found on that information. It might be good. It might be bad. I don't know until it comes back. So, Storm, when people say, oh, how quickly, I can't answer that question. I can give you a best guesstimate, but a lot of it is based upon how quickly you, the client, are willing to learn to do this and how quickly you're willing to get the letters out and back to me. And if it gets down to the point where I need to teach you how to try and negotiate out debts, it's based time-wise on the client. So some clients are like, yay, let's go, and get it done quickly. And other clients, it's kind of like they're not even responding to my requests because they really don't want to do it. They want someone to do it for them. And I really don't want to do it for them. That defeats the purpose. So in my case, if they get into a house and they call me 2 weeks later and my score dropped 100 points, you learned absolutely nothing. So a credit repair company wants them to fail so they can keep paying. I don't want them to fail because I don't want them to come back. Send me your friends for help, but I want you, the client, to get it.
Well, let me ask you, do you have like an hourly rate that if someone, has been scammed by somebody, or there's one of these groups that says that they're going to repair their credit within 30 days, do you have an hourly rate that you could charge, that if I was to call up and say, hey, look, this company is telling me thus and such and thus and such, can you tell me whether this is true or not? Do you charge for that?
Yeah, well, what I typically do that first month, that includes the spreadsheet analysis. I charge a flat rate of $125 and $200 if it's a couple to go through that and provide the first set of letters. Now, if they have, let's say they have more than 10, then I'm going to, items where I see there's a problem, then there's going to be an additional surcharge because there's more letters and more work for me when they get information back. But I will tell you, the clients that I have dealt with over the last many years, basically in the beginning, they seem to think I'm expensive, but at the end they go, they all go, oh, you should be charging more money, Laurie. Oh, look what we learned, and we got into a house. And so it's the happy motivational ones that I like to work with. I don't like to work, Storm, with procrastinators who can't make decisions. If you can't make a decision about credit and buying a house, and that's a big thing, how are you handling smaller things? It tells me that you're not. You don't have your life in order. You don't have your money in order. And so I guess basically I'm an opportunity to learn how to get in order relative to credit.
Well, Laurie, we're just about out of time here. If you'd like to tell us how to contact you, get that in before we get cut off.
Yep. My phone number is 813-500-6064, or you can go to Credit Education Consultants with an S at the end, .com, and you can reach me that way as well.
Well, Laurie, another great show. next week, hopefully we're going to have somebody on with the FBI to speak about this scam that everybody has $100 million in a Treasury account. So why don't you take us out of here, and we'll see each other next week.
Sounds good. And for our listeners, contact us through the Fraudsters Radio Facebook page. We want to hear your stories. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, Laurie.
Bye, Storm.